Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good weekend and enjoyed your week away from this class, at least. In our time together today, I want to take a few moments and go over the most recent homework assignment that you submitted. During that process, and then after that, I will be glad to answer any questions that you might have. We have one more class session this week, and then of course next week is spring break, and the first thing that happens when you get back from spring break is your midterm exam. Keep in mind the midterm exam primarily focuses on the things that we have talked about together in class, but it does also include major themes and content from your textbook reading, so hopefully you are current in reading that. At this point for today, you should have read up through chapter 11 and then later this week through chapter number 12. So make sure that you're staying on top of that. One resource that I will make available to you after class today, the graduate students, as their graduate project, have been preparing questions both from the textbook reading and from our class sessions. I will bundle all those up in an archive and distribute them to the class by way of D2L so that you can download them and use them in your review. Keep in mind that I make no promise to you as to either the quality of the questions or whether or not the answer there is correct or not, so kind of use them at your own peril, but it is a resource that hopefully will be helpful to you that have been prepared by some of your classmates. Let me also briefly mention something that I hope you are aware of and hope you're planning to participate in, and that is Wednesday in the Culp Center is the career fair from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. There are a number of companies coming that hire computing students, both for internships and for career positions after graduation, including a number that have hired people into SAP-related positions. So if you are interested in a career in business intelligence, things related to SAP or otherwise, I would really encourage you to attend that event. If you're graduating this year and you don't have a job nailed down, then you definitely need to be there. But even if you're still a year or more away from graduation, there's nothing wrong with visiting the event, meeting the employers, talking to them about their opportunities, and making initial contacts for the future. So, all of that being said, as I mentioned, what I'd like to do is go through the 3 different programs I asked you to write for homework. One reason why I'm doing this is that there was great variability in the answers I saw. There were some students that did extremely well on the homework, and then there were students at the opposite end of the spectrum. I saw a lot of people that wrote far more code and far more confusing code than was necessary to solve any of the issues here. And so I thought the best way to go about both reviewing the major themes of what we've been talking about and to deal with any questions you might have is just to walk through this with my completing this as I would attack it if I were working on this as a homework assignment. So, program number 1, create a screen report based on information copied from a database table to an internal table. For this program, you'll be extracting data from the S airport table and inserting it into an internal table. You'll be editing this internal table and then creating an output report. Note the following. Your program should not in any way modify the database table S airport. All modifications are to be made to the internal table in your program. All airports represented in the S airport table should appear in your output except as further noted below. Your program should output a table showing each airport name and its 3-letter airport code. The table should have a header line at the top identifying the table contents and a line underneath the header line. The output should be rendered sorted by the 3-letter airport code. A new airport's been built. The name of the airport is ETSU Airport with the 3-letter airport code ETS. Add this airport to your internal table before creating the output. Hamburg Airport is closed, remove it from your internal table, and Nashville Airport has changed its 3-letter airport code from BNA to NAS. Change this in your internal table. So, with all of that being said, let's talk about how we would attack this particular problem. And I would suggest to you that 90% of the time, your first stop when doing any kind of work that relates to something that is in the database is to actually look at the database table itself using transaction code SE11, putting in the name of the database table, and display. And you'll notice that this particular database table has 4 fields. One that we would expect to see in almost all of our database table, that being the Mont field where the client is stored. And then we have airport code, airport name, and airport time zone, which are the fields ID, name, and time zone. Well, if we think about the specification of our program, we only need 2 of those fields. We only need the airport code and airport name. Now, some of you elected to make your internal table patterned after the database table, which I did not deduct points for because there's really only one field of significant difference here. But the general rule of thumb is if we're not using the vast majority of the fields in the database table, we would want to create our own structure upon which to base our internal table. So for the sake of my walkthrough, that's what I'm actually going to do here. So I will begin with a types statement where I will create a structure to allow me to accomplish this. And I'm just going to call this an airp struct for airport structure. And there are 2 fields that I need for this, and the name should match up exactly with the name of the fields in the database table, and that's ID and name. And so I know I'm going to have a field here called ID, and I know I'm going to have a field here called name, so I'll go ahead and type those in. And in fact, if I remember something that we talked about in class, my job here becomes really, really easy because the type of ID is simply now going to be the name of the database table, which is S Airport, and the name of the field. So I don't even have to go back and look at the database table once I know the name of the field to make sure I've got the type right here. And for this one, it's going to be S Airport name. Those are in fact the only fields I need, so I'm going to end my airp struct. And so this is the first thing that I've elected to do in my program here. The next thing is for me to set up my internal table. Now there's 2 different ways I could do this. I could jump immediately to a data statement, or I could create a type and then create a data statement based on that. And I'll do that in this particular walkthrough. And so I'm going to define an airp table type, which will be, now what kind of table is this? If I go back to my specification, it says, point number 4, the output should be rendered sorted by the 3-letter airport code. This should be a sorted table. Anytime we have sorting going on, we should employ a sorted internal table so that we don't have to manage sort order in any way in the context of our program. So this will be a type sorted table of my airp struct with, and I have 2 choices here. I can either declare this to be a unique or non-unique key. A sorted table can have either, and in fact it really doesn't matter. because we know that the keys are in fact unique, so I'll go ahead and put with unique key. But once again, the reality is that it really does not matter, because non-unique key is going to achieve the exact same results here. But with unique key and ID is the three-letter code that I want this to be sorted on, sorted by based on the specification. So now I need to create two things. I create my I table, my internal table, which will be type ERP, make sure I get this right, ERP table type, and then I'll create a work area, and I'll use the standard syntax like line of I table. And so that line of code right there shows up in most programs that I write related to internal tables. So I've saved this. I'm going to go ahead and do a preliminary syntax check, make sure I didn't mistype anything, and so far so good. So I have defined a structure. I have defined the type of an internal table based on that structure, and then in my program I have instantiated both the internal table and a work area to go with it. Well, now it's time to do an array fetch to retrieve things from the database table into the internal table, and I'm only using two fields, so I will select ID and name from S airport into corresponding fields of. Want to get in the habit of always using that clause. It just saves us from shooting ourselves in the foot. Into corresponding fields of. Now I'm going to purposely make a mistake here. It's probably the most common mistake I make, and perhaps it's one that you might have seen in doing your homework. This line of code that I've written here looks very logical. Select ID name from S airport into corresponding fields of I table. But we will see when we do a syntax check here that we get back an error message, and that's because that statement is not syntactically correct. Internal tables cannot be used as work areas. Incorrect nesting. Before the end of the program, the control structure by select must be closed with end select. That has to do with something called the select loop, which we will talk about when we talk more about working with database tables. But that whole error sequence is triggered because I left off the word table right here. And I'm retrieving into corresponding fields of table, I table. And we'll see that once I make that particular change, then my error condition goes away. But I point that out because that is an extremely common error for people to make in their coding. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to forget all the manipulations that I have to do with my internal table and come back to that. And for now, I'm going to work on my output, just to keep things simple here, and just so that I can rest assured in the fact that my program is going out and pulling in all of the things from the database into my internal table correctly. So I'm going to be writing out to the screen the ID, and then I'll jump over to column 10, and I will write out the airport name. So I'm just going to put that out, and then put an underline, and then I'm going to use my work area, loop at I table into WA. We'll use our work area a lot in this program. The whole reason why we create a work area is it is our go-to structure for doing any kind of manipulation with our database table, or our internal table, excuse me. So I'm going to loop at my internal table into my work area, and all that's going to happen here now in the guts of this is I'm going to go to a new line, and I'm going to write out the ID under the text label called ID, and then I'm going to write out from the work area name under the text label name, and then I'm going to end my loop. Now my program is not done, but it passes syntax check. We'll go ahead and activate it and run it just to see what we have now, and that's what we have at this point. I have a sorted list of airports with the ID and the name showing for each of them, and so we're in pretty good shape so far. So what do I have left? I have points 5 and 6 and 7 to take care of now in my coding, so I'll go back and plan to put those in. But before I do that, are there any questions anyone has about any of the code I've written so far? All right, so the next thing it tells me to do is to put in the ETSU airport. So I'm going to do that by using my work area to populate the work area with the data for this new airport. So my work area ID is going to be set to ETS, and my work area name is going to be set to, what did I say to call that? ETSU airport. That's it. Only 2 fields here in play, all I need to worry about. So I need to put that in my internal table. Insert WA into table ITable, and so that's now in there. And in fact, if I want to check this to make sure, I always like to do this in stepwise fashion. That way, before I move on to the next thing, I make sure I got the first thing nailed. And sure enough, about halfway down the page, we can see that ETSU Airport is in the list, and so life is good there. The next thing I was asked to do is get rid of the Hamburg Airport. So if I looked at the output and in the specification, both of them told me that the code for the Hamburg Airport was ham. So just need to delete ham here. So delete table, ITable. I'm deleting from my internal table with table key ID equals ham. The end. That should have now deleted the Hamburg Airport, and once again, following my pattern of double checking to make sure before we move along, we can see that Hamburg Airport is now no longer there. It clearly was there before, so we're good there. Now, the last thing that I asked you to do is perhaps the trickiest thing, and that is the Nashville Airport has changed its 3-letter airport code from BNA to NAS. Change this in your internal table. Well, this is a multi-step process because with internal tables, I cannot modify the key of a record. So what am I going to have to do? If I cannot change the key of that given record, if we think about this logically, then what I'm going to need to do is retrieve the old record, update it, put it back in the table, and then delete the old record. So it's a multi-step process here, but not really anything that significant. So the first thing I'm going to do is read table ITable with table key ID equals BNA into WA. So now my work area has the Nashville Airport's information in it. This is a good technique for me to follow because let's assume at this point that this was a much more complex record. If there were 50 fields of data associated with this airport, I've now pulled them all into my work area. What is it that I want to change? Well, the work area right now has that the ID field is set to BNA. I got to get rid of that. So work area ID field is going to be reset to Nashville. So now what is set in my work area is the record I want to have in my database table. So let's go ahead and put it in the table. Insert WA into table ITable. So now my corrected Nashville record is in the table, leaving me just one more step, and that's to wipe out the old record for the Nashville airport, and that code's going to look a lot like what we did on line 26. Delete table, itable, whoops, not data table. Delete table, itable with table key ID equals BNA. So now, if I run this, we should see that BNA is gone for the Nashville airport, and I have, in fact, if I scroll down, the Nashville airport showing up as NAS in the sort order here. So what you should get in the habit of doing is going back to your specification and making sure we have fulfilled everything. Extracting data from S airport into an internal table, check. Not modifying S airport. All of the things in S airport are in my output. I've got each airport name and its 3-letter code. I've got the header line at the top. Everything's sorted by 3-letter airport code. I've got the ETSU airport in there. I've got the Hamburg airport closed. I've got the Nashville airport changed. I'm good. This is a complete and correct solution for program number 1. Any questions about any of the things that was done here? Yes, sir.
Is your work area as defined able to contain more than one row?
No. That's why I have handled everything in a serial fashion. I've done one thing, then I've done the next, then I've done the next. We will see a little bit later on, you can actually have a internal table, we'll say that's big, a work area, and then a smaller internal table that you could put some stuff in and then put that smaller internal table into the bigger one. So you do sometimes see that, but even in that structure, I would say that 90% plus of the time when you have an internal table, you're going to have a work area for exactly this kind of stuff. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Instead of the with table key, what about the where clause? The where ID? Since this was just a regular or a sorted table, the where clause is going to work.
So give me a line of code you'd like me to change.
Instead of the with table key, you could just replace that with where ID EQ value.
So like, let's say you're saying I could do delete table, itable, where ID equals ham.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Let's see if that, the fact that it turned red there is making me a little concerned.
And you don't need the table definition.
So delete itable, where ID equals ham. Yep, looks like it passes syntax check, and let's make sure that Hamburg's gone. It is. So yeah. And I have no trouble with people using alternate syntax. There's multiple ways of accomplishing it, and so this is perfectly fine. Other questions? All right. Some of the things that I'm trying to think of that I saw as common mistakes were people not using a sorted table. I saw some people that did all kinds of complex things to change the Nashville airport to NAS. A few people got messed up with the creating of the output, but for the most part that looked pretty good. And on the whole, most people seem to do pretty well here for program number 1. All right, so let's move on then to program number 2. Program number 2 has some interesting things in it that were, we talked a little bit about things related to in class, and then was covered in your video some things that I think should have helped you here as well. Create a short report based on data copied from a database table to an internal table. For this program, it will be provided general specifications. It's up to you to determine implementation details. That is almost always a hint that there is an embedded problem that is conveyed in the execution of this program that I do not explicitly point out to you. 75% of you missed that but I did not take off points for it for this homework assignment because we hadn't gone over this in class and you were working from a video and so on. But I will talk about it in our discussion, and I will commend those of you that did actually find this and solve it in your coding. So you want to allow users to input the two-letter abbreviation for an airline, example LH, and then be told in an output report the name of the airline, Lufthansa, the currency the airline uses, the euro in this case, and the URL of the airline, which in this case is http://www.lufthansa.com. Note that your implementation should bring all the needed airline information for all airlines into an internal table, and then the output information should be drawn from that internal table. We're doing that to give us a way to practice with internal tables. Obviously, in the future, we'd want to go and pull this directly from the database and not mess around with internal tables, but this is a good exercise for us nonetheless. If you develop your solution correctly, you should find that the user's input makes the job of picking the desired airline easy. That was another big hint for something that you should have done by default anyhow, and then the source table to use for this is scar. So like I said a moment ago, my first stop whenever I'm working with a database table is always to look at that database table. And I see, in fact, that the scar database table has 5 fields: carrier ID, which is the airline code, carrier name, the currency of the airline, and the URL. Now, if we look at the specification, it tells us that we are using the name of the airline, the currency, and the URL. So in fact, we are using everything there in our program except for the client, and the client is just there in the background that we don't have to worry about it. So in fact, I am going to be using every field in the database table in my internal table, so that gives me a different scenario than we saw in our last program, and there is no reason whatsoever for me to create my own data type in this program. It would be totally unnecessary work. So, yes, sir.
When I look at the tables, I pulled up the view to see what was inside the table, and that did not show the URL for me.
It did not show what?
It did not show the URL. For
And that I think we looked at this last time, but let me point it out because it's tricky.
That's what caused me to write out the WW.
Okay, so let's look at this. If I go to look at the contents here, and what I'm going to guess you and probably some of your classmates did is, if I hit execute here and it shows me the table, there are a couple of hints. First of all, I just came from a screen that told me there was a field called URL. It also says right here in the top center that I am looking at 4 of the 5 fields. Well, what in the world? Why is it not giving me all of the fields in the table? And it's because of this right here. The default width is to only show me the 250 characters wide. If I bump that up to, let's say, 500 characters wide, now it's going to put them out there. It's just kind of an oddity of the interface, But I would say that the rule of thumb here is even with that oddity, the URL is in the spec here. So that would it should have jumped out to you as an option there. But I can't tell you why it works this way as far as it only showing the 250 characters, but it does. All right, so let's first thing we have to do here, and what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm going to let's go ahead and take this in the way we would execute this. I'll change my mind here. I know I'm going to get data from the user. I would encourage you to put your parameter statement as the very first thing in your program. Some of you might have discovered that, in fact, you can put the parameter statement as the last statement in your program and it will still work. That's because we're not doing anything in terms of event-driven programming yet, where we're explicitly controlling the event control flow. Parameters bubbles to the top of the event stack. Later on, we're going to control that. But for right now, to get us set up for that, get in the habit of putting parameters first. So I need to get from the user the airline code. So I'll just call this parameter airline type. Now, what is my type here? This is where some of you went off the rails, where you did type C, length 2, or type string, or some other variation of that. Here's what you need to get into your brain. This is something that traces back to a database table. When anything ever traces back to the database table, I use the database table type as my type. So parameters airline type, same technique we used in our last program when we were building our structure, scar caret, because it's the caret field in the scar table that is what this relates to. And I want to require the user to put this in, so I'm going to make this obligatory. Now, just to see the significance of this, for those of you that did not see that in your program, merely by doing what I just did, I picked up something in my program. And you'll notice that when I execute my program, next to the field where I can type something in is that little magnifying glass with a box behind it, which you might remember is the visual cue for F4 search. So the user could either press F4 on their keyboard or hit this right here, and they're going to be presented that right there. How did I get that? I got that by using the right data type. Because as soon as I specified that as the data type, the ABAP environment is smart enough to realize, oh, well, I can go out and I can provide input help associated with that data type, which clearly this is a very nice feature for the end user. And it also has with it the merit of making sure that I'm more likely to get valid information from the user. So I've taken care of the user input part of this. Now I've got to come back in and set up my data structures here. And last time I did a type statement. This time I'm going to jump right past the type statement just because I can to show you an alternative. And this time we're going to create our internal table just using a data statement. So here I'm going to do this, data iTable type. Now, do I need to ask the system to sort this for me? There's absolutely no reason for me to do that because I'm not creating a multi-line output. So to ask for a sorted table here would waste computation. So data iTable type standard table of, and my database table is scar with standard tables, I can only have non-unique key. So non-unique key carrier ID, because that's what I'm going to use to fetch from this. And then I didn't use a chain statement here, so data WA like line of iTable. And I told you that that line right there is going to show up in most of my programs. The reason why I can get away with line 10 being like it is now I have an internal table that matches the structure of scar in its entirety. And I want all the fields, so this is good, and I'm showing you that we can jump directly to a data statement without a type statement. Would not be wrong to have a type statement, but this is just an alternate way for us to structure our code. So now I have my internal table, and I have my work area, so it's time for me to fill this guy up again. Select star from scar into, really don't have to have into corresponding fields of here, but I'm going to get in the habit of always using it into corresponding fields of table iTable. So now I have filled up my internal table, and the next thing I need to do is read table iTable with, and this is similar to what we did in the last program, with table key caret equals what I got from the user, which is airline into WA. So now my work area should have an airline information sitting in it. And so now I need to write some output here. So write carrier, and I'll just go over here to column 12, WA dash carrier name. I didn't specify what this format should look like here, but while I'm typing, let me remind you our rule of thumb, which for some reason in some circumstances we can't always fulfill, but where possible our rule of thumb is one write statement for each line of output, and so there's certainly no compelling reason why I can't do that here. Write URL 12 WA-URL. All right, so save, execute, or excuse me, activate, execute. So let's see how this works. Airline, Delta, execute. Delta Airlines uses US dollars, and their currency is what, or their URL is what you see there. Let's look up another one here. South African Airlines. South African Airlines uses the, I don't know what that is, ZAR, and then you see their URL there. So this looks like a finished program. This is the program that I got from a lot of people. There are still two issues with this program that need to be fixed. Can anybody tell me what either of them are? Yes, sir.
Your input should accept up to 3 characters, even though they don't need 2 in the table as far as identifiers.
Okay, well, it matches up with the database table, so presumably it would accept 3 characters. You're kind of on the right track. Yes?
Error handling.
What kind of error could I have?
User validation.
I'm not validating the user data. And by that I mean, watch this. Execute ZZ. That's not good output. Okay? Because what it did is it looked through my internal table to find an airline that matched ZZ, and that's what it came back with. And so now, at minimum, I've confused the users. In a lot of your programs print absolutely nothing on the screen, which I can guarantee you would confuse the users. So how do I fix this? This is something that there are a myriad of techniques that we could employ. Let me show you the easiest way to fix this. And by the way, I did not take off points on your program for not doing this, okay? But I did note it in the comments. So, how do I fix this? The easiest way to fix this is to think about what's going on in my program. I created an internal table, I created a work area. I filled my internal table. On line 15, I attempted to put into my work area a record that matches this specification. Which means that after line 15, 2 things are possible. That work area could have data in it, or the work area could be empty. If the work area is empty, it's because it did not find a match in the internal table. So how do I check to see if the work area is empty? The syntax for that is as follows. If WA, if my work area is initial. That means that my work area has nothing in it. It's still in its initial unfilled state. If my work area is initial, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write to the screen something like, that is not a valid airline. And then my else clause is, and here's something that I don't know if you have seen in the SAP GUI interface that is very handy. I already had this lines of code down here. They're not indented correctly. What I can do is I can highlight these 3 lines, right click, choose Format, and choose Increase Line Indent, and it'll move those guys over for me. End if. So let's check this now and see what we're looking at here. Whoops, got a mistake here. What's my mistake?
Line 18, I got a period.
Ah, thank you. I put a period at the end of my sentence, but not at the end of my sentence, which sounds confusing, but I think you know what I mean. All right, so, okay, so let's check. ZZ. No results found. That's not a valid airline. As was noted, what if I put 1, 2, 3? See, it does take 3 letters here, and that's going to say that's not a valid airline either. And of course, if the user does use search as we expected and chooses Japan Airlines, I get the input. So there's 2 things you should know here. First of all, you don't want to forget about in some way checking the validity of the user input. And second of all, in the homework assignments, whenever I throw a statement at you like, for this program, you'll provide general specifications up to you to determine implementation details. That means there's something like this embedded in that problem that you need to find. Maybe more than one things of these sort, because I don't want to tell you that. Part of your job as a programmer is thinking about the specification and thinking about all the different things that occur. Now, there's one other thing that you should have done. I did not take off points for you're not doing it in this program. Many of you did this, some of you did not, and that is, this is not really good user prompting. Now, I use the parameters name airline, which is a little bit more descriptive than what some of you used with things like var1 and other variable names of that sort. We need to give the user at least some clue what it is that we're expecting them to do here. And remember, the way we do that is through the use of the text pool. And so I go to, and now I've got to remember where it is here. It always seems weird to me that that's under go to, but go to text elements, and my selection text, here's airline, and I want to change this. And so I could put in here, please, whoops, I toggled it the wrong direction. Please select the desired airline. I only have a limited amount of space there, so please select airline would work. Save. I have to activate my selection text, which I just did. I go back. I don't know if I have to reactivate the program or not. There we go. Please select airline. Now that's a little bit better in terms of user prompting. So, good rule of thumb, go back to your specification, short report, 2-letter abbreviation. I think we match up with the spec pretty good here. Any questions? Anything that was done in this program that you would like me to talk a little bit more about? Notice, it's a 23-line program, but 5 of the lines are that heading at the top there. So we're talking about a program that's really less than 20 lines of code that we had to write. Any questions?
So in the first one, using the types and setting up the table that way was because we only wanted a limited number of fields,
Yes.
not the entire.
You got it. And we're going to definitely see that in program number 3. So, without further ado, program number 3. Let's talk about that. Create a program which will output mailing labels for travel agencies in the U.S. The format of the label should be as follows. Database table S travelog contains information on travel agencies. Take a moment to examine this table. The output should be in the format. And I will tell you that very, very, very few people turned in a perfect program. There were some people that got really, really close, and I could be wrong about there might be somebody that turned in a perfect program. There is a subtle issue in this program that is very hard to catch. Let's finish looking at the spec here. A couple of S travel out to your internal table. Only move those fields relevant to your processing. Move all rows of records. Add to your internal table travel agency with blanks agency. And by the way, this was important because I wanted to see if you knew how to handle the apostrophe in there. Sunshine Travel has changed its name. Transworld Travel is closed. Use the internal table as a source for your mailing list. But far and away, the most common mistake, and by the way, I write your homework as a specification. You should read it as a specification. The very first sentence of the specification says, with emphasis, create a program which will output mailing labels for travel agencies in the U.S. Most of you gave me travel agencies from around the world. That did not fulfill the specification. And in fact, you should have also picked up on that when your mailing labels look kind of wonky because of how international addresses look. But nonetheless, let's work on this program. So, don't have any user input, so I can pretty much start here at the top and just wipe all that out. And my first step, almost always, is going to be to look at my database table. S travel lag. And the first thing you should notice here is I have a lot more fields in this table than I need in my program. So this is absolutely a case where I should be defining my own structure. Otherwise, I'm just going to have a lot of wasted overhead here. Do I need the travel agency number? No, it's not part of my spec. Do I need the name? Yes. Do I need the street? Yes. Do I need the P.O. box? No, I don't think so. Do I need the postal code? Yes. Do I need the city? Yes. Do I need the country? Yes, because I've got to distinguish between U.S. and other travel agencies. Do I need the region? This is actually the state, and if we looked at the data, you'd see that. Do I need the telephone number? No. URL? No. Language? No. Travel agency local currency? No. So there's a lot of fields there I don't actually need. But what I'll sometimes do is capture a screen capture of this, or be working at a workstation with two monitors, so I can put this on one monitor with my code on the other, so I have reference to this. Yes, sir?
What field would you make an ID out of this?
Run that by me again.
What field would you make an ID out of this?
So I would look at my specification, and somewhere in here it says,
Is it what it's sorted by?
yeah, where does it say that? Display the list with the agency sorted by name. So I would make the agency name the sort key is really what we're talking about. Don't get too wrapped around the idea that this is like a database key. Think of this more like an Excel worksheet, and the key is what you're sorting by, is the way we usually think of keys with an internal table. So types begin of, and I'm just going to call this agency type. And what fields do I need? Well, I need the name, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to just type the fields I need. I need the name, I need the street, I need the postcode, I need the city, I need the country, and I need the region. A lot of times I'll do exactly like I did here, look at my database, think about my program, just type the names of the fields, because once I get that done, then everything else here is really mechanical. Type, S, travel, lag, dash, and sometimes I'll even do this. I'll highlight and copy, and then this becomes name, and then I'll come down here, and this becomes street, and then I'll come down here, and this becomes postcode, and then I'll come down here, and this becomes city, and then country, and then region, end of agency type. Okay, so sometimes at this point I'll go ahead and do a syntax check just to make sure I haven't missed a comma or anything. So far, so good. Just to show you, I'll create my data type for my internal table. So types, agency, table, type, sorted table of agency type with, could have 2 travel agencies with the same name at different addresses, so I need to be prepared for that eventuality, non-unique key name. And I'll just make this wrap for the sake of our screen width here. So there's that. Now I actually need to create this data I table, type, agency table type. And for the record, I don't mind you using iTable as the name of your internal table if there's just one internal table in your program. Very, very common to do that. If you've got more than one internal table, we need better names here. And similarly, WA is commonly used as the name of your work area. And so there I have both my internal table and my work area, and now it's time to fill this guy up. So select name, street, postcode, city, country, region, from Estravelag into corresponding fields of table, iTable. So now I have filled this guy up. Now, before I go any further here and do all my maintenance, I like to go ahead and just jump to the end and work on outputting my mailing labels. Then I can go back and take out and put in what I need to, but it gives me kind of an intermediate sanity check. You don't have to do this if you don't want, but this is the way I like to attack these. So I'm going to loop add iTable into WA, and here's the part most of you were missing. I only want to output this record that I'm looking at if it's in the United States. So if WA-country equals US. Now I'm going to do some output. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write. On the first line, this is really simple, WA name. Then write on the second line, WA street. And then I'm going to write on the third line, and I'm going to start the way a lot of you started, or perhaps even ended in some cases. WA, whoops, that should be a period, not a comma. WA city, WA region, WA postcode, and then after this I need a horizontal line, and if, and loop. Okay, now obviously my mailing label is not correct, but let's just make sure we're like in the right ballpark here. So I look like I'm in the right ballpark, but clearly my third line there looks really weird with that Boston and all that space there between Massachusetts and so on. And some of you have forgotten this guy right here, which strips out the padding, because if we go back to our table definition here, the city is 25 characters wide. So you were getting whatever the name of the city was, followed by padding for spaces. So I put that in there, and oops, I got to activate it. Okay, so I've got to put my comma in. I forgot my comma. So let me do that. Go back here and put comma. And see if we're where we need to be. And we're not. Now I have Boston space, comma. And the problem here is that after the city, I need to get rid of the space there. So I got to get rid of that gap. So now I do no gap. Oops, I keep forgetting I have to activate it. And now I have Boston, Massachusetts. And you might say, yay, my label's right. And I would say, boo, you're wrong. If you look at the specification and if you look at my sample output, there's too much white space there between the state and the zip code. And it's for the exact same reason that we saw where Boston was too long. The state is actually padded. I believe, and let's go and check, but I think that's because of our database definition here, where state is actually region, and region is defined to be 3 characters. Now, I didn't take off points for this, but to be precise, this is something you should have fixed in your program, and that is to get this to fully match up, I would need that guy on region as well. And now I don't have that extra space. Now, the reason why I put that in this program, and one of the reasons why I'm going over this, and one of the reasons why I'm emphasizing it now, is these guys show up a lot in output. We didn't need them on line 28 and 29, but I venture to say fully half of the write statements that we'll ever put into an op-off program is going to use these guys. So don't forget about them. And don't forget about no gap. They show up a lot. So if you're kind of fuzzy as to how they work, go back and look that over, because this is something that we will make heavy use of. All right, so I've taken care of some elements of my specification, but now I have to do my adding a new record, taking care of sunshine travel, and taking care of trans-world travel. So I'm going to go back to my program here and put some new code in. But before I do, let me just pause. Any questions anybody has?
Is this being recorded?
It is. Okay, so putting a new record in. I'm going to use my work area. WA-name equals, there are all kinds of ways that I can get a single quote inside of a string literal, which is what we're talking about here. And many of you use various techniques that are different than what I'm about to show you. I'm going to call mine Freddie's Agency and FREDDY. When I want an apostrophe, just put 2 back to back. Freddie's. And by the way, I shouldn't do what I just did. FREDDY apostrophe S agency. Okay, that's one way to get an apostrophe in there. WA-street equals 111 Elm Street. Oops. WA-postcode equals 12345. WA-city equals Johnson City. WA-country equals US. Got to make sure I put that one in, or this isn't showing up in output. WA-region equals TN. And lastly, insert WA into table iTable. So save, activate, run, and we should see Freddie's Agency shows up in just where we would expect it there, in correct sort order in my output here. So the next thing was to change Sunshine Travel into AAA Travel. And we're going to use the exact same technique we used in the very first program, because I cannot modify the name of the travel agency because it's my key. And I had you do this because there's no way around this. There's no trick to this. I have to do this as a multi-step process. So I'm going to read table, iTable with, and as we observed before, there's alternate syntax here, with table key name equals Sunshine Travel into WA. So now I've picked up all of the street, the postcode, the city, the region, all that is now sitting in my work area. And I want to change the name to AAA Travel. I want to insert WA into table, iTable. That line of code looks familiar. And then I want to delete table, iTable with table key name equals Sunshine Travel. Now, some of you employed some techniques using index numbers. I trust I don't really have to explain to you why that's bad, because a database table is a changeable thing. But ideally written, my program should always work. So I don't want to depend on the fact that Sunshine Travel was record number, let's say 13, because it might not always be 13. But in this case, I have pulled out Sunshine Travel. If we checked our alphabetic listing here, we'll see that Sunshine Travel is gone. And we in fact do see that AAA Travel is there because it's right there as the first line of the output. And then the last item that I ask you to do is very, very easy in light of what we have been doing, and that's to bump off Trans World Travel. And so that's going to be delete table, iTable with table key name equals Trans World Travel. And we should now see that Trans World Travel is in fact gone. So I think if we revisit the specification, we have fulfilled everything. Once again, there are variations on different lines of code that one could employ, but this would be a fully correct answer for program number 3. Any questions about this? Yes, sir.
If there was more than one agency named Trans World Travel, would it delete both?
It would, which is the peril of my rather incomplete specification. You know, I told you delete Trans World Travel, so you're kind of, does that mean delete every Trans World Travel if there's more than one? You know, in this program that didn't matter. In the real world, you know, that's where you'd want to get back with your client and maybe ask them to clarify that. Yes, sir.
Looking at that with the SE11 and browsing the table, and since there was no unique ID, would it be safe to assume that the name was supposed to be unique?
Well, I don't know that we really have to care. I mean, if we look at it, the only thing that it looks like to me, based on the design of the table, that the key field here is the agency number. But nowhere in our program did we say anything about having to deal with agency numbers. So we could have overlapping names. We could have actually 2 different travel agencies that are operating at the same address. We could have a lot of overlap here. And so this is where the design of my program is as specific as my specification allows. My specification said delete Trans World Travel, so I deleted Trans World
Even
Travel.
what Carter just said,
Yeah, and that's where if you had checked the database and saw that there were multiples of them, that's where, you know, you could shoot the customer, shoot me an email and say, hey, you said to do this. Do you want all of them gone or just one? And now, by the way, I'm always happy to take questions. If you ever run into something that you want clarified, I'm absolutely happy to do that for you. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
When we're deleting these fields, does it make a difference when you throw in that delete statement?
Not really.
Not really, okay.
You know, I guess the one thing I would say is be consistent about your process here. Like, you're talking about what we see on lines 34 through 37. If I had told you to delete 5 different travel agencies. Establish a pattern and follow that pattern for all 5 of them as far as the sequence here. But I could have read into the work area and then deleted Sunshine Travel and then done the changing of the name and the inserting.
That's how I was doing, I wanted to make sure
Yeah,
there was
no,
no problem.
that's totally fine. There's no problem with that whatsoever. Other questions? So my encouragement to you is, although we've gone over this now, I think it would be time well spent if you didn't do so hot on any of the homework programs to go back and rewrite them now on your own without referencing this video, this code, and see if you could rewrite it at this point. I would suggest to you that if you can, that's a good sign as far as your level of comfort with working with internal tables. But don't just watch the video and think that that's going to be good. There's no substitute for your writing your own code. It's not likely, well, I'll just go and say, you're not going to have another, well, let me not say that. Never mind. I was going to say you're not going to have another homework before the midterm exam, but I might give you a small homework assignment related to what we're going to talk about on Wednesday. But you won't have another big homework assignment before the midterm exam. But you'll have to know this for the midterm exam.
And we will have to handwrite the code out?
No, what you're most likely going to see, because your midterm exam, by the way, will be taken in the testing center. If you haven't signed up for your time for that, sign up for your time for that. I think I put that up as a D12 news announcement, but it might have rolled over to the second page. I'll check and put it back up if I didn't. But that Monday you come back from spring break, you have the entire day to take it in the testing center. We won't meet that morning, so if you want to take it first thing, you can. But if you want to take it in the afternoon, the evening, whatever, that's up to you. But you'll take the midterm exam in the testing center. And so you're going to see statements like, write a single line of ABAP code to read the record where the name is Sunshine Travel from an internal table called iTable. And you would have to write something like line 34. Or I might say, variables X, Y, and Z have been created. Create a write statement to output them so that they match this format. Those are the kinds of things. For your midterm, you will not have to write any extended code sequences. Other questions? All right, so we don't have enough time to start into any new material for today, so this was what I wanted to do today, go over the homework and give you opportunity to ask whatever questions you might have. On Wednesday, we'll start into some new things. Next week, we have spring break, and then after that, you have your midterm exam. Have a good day, everyone. I'll just say this. You were going to have a quiz today, but you had so many questions, we did not have time for the quiz. So before you leave, will you come up here and sign the sign-in sheet, and then you guys can turn on.